Something went wrong with human birth roughly 3 million years ago. Before that point, our ancestors gave birth to babies that could cling to their mothers, hold up their heads, and move within hours. Then something changed. The babies started arriving earlier, less developed, more fragile, and with each generation, they got worse. Not because the species was failing, because the species was making a bet that would either produce the most intelligent animal on the planet or kill the species entirely. It did both. To understand what happened, you need to understand the problem evolution was trying to solve, and it starts with walking upright. Around 6 million years ago, your ancestors still moved on all fours. Their pelvis was wide, shaped like a broad, shallow bowl, built to support horizontal weight and to let a large-skulled baby pass through without difficulty. Birth, by primate standards, was simple. The baby's head was small enough relative to the birth canal that delivery was fast, low risk, and didn't need help. Then something shifted. The climate in East Africa changed. Forests shrank, grasslands expanded, and a group of apes began spending more time on two legs. Over millions of years, bipedalism became permanent. And when it did, it reshaped the entire human skeleton from the ground up. The pelvis was the biggest casualty. To walk upright efficiently, the pelvis had to narrow. The iliac blades rotated inward. The birth canal, which in four-legged primates was a simple wide opening, became a tight, twisted passage. In modern humans, the birth canal isn't even a straight shot. The baby has to rotate during delivery, turning roughly 90 degrees mid-exit, threading through a space that was redesigned for walking, not reproduction. This alone would have been manageable. Plenty of species walk upright with narrow pelvises, but evolution wasn't done. Because at the exact same time the pelvis was shrinking, something else was growing. The brain. Starting around 2 to 3 million years ago, hominin brain size began increasing at a rate that had no precedent in primate evolution. Australopithecus, one of our early bipedal ancestors, had a brain volume of roughly 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, not much larger than a modern chimpanzee. But by the time Homo erectus showed up around 1.8 million years ago, brain volume had jumped to roughly 600 to 900 cubic centimeters, and in modern Homo sapiens, the average sits around 1,350 cubic centimeters, nearly triple the starting point. This is the collision. The pelvis was getting narrower to make walking efficient. The brain was getting larger to make thinking possible, and both of these changes were happening to the same species at the same time. Evolution was building a bigger engine and a smaller door. Simultaneously, something had to give. What gave was the baby. In 1960, an anthropologist named Washburn published a paper that laid out the problem in blunt terms. He called it the obstetric dilemma. His argument was simple. If a human baby were born at the same neurological maturity as a chimpanzee newborn, pregnancy would need to last roughly 18 to 21 months. But a 21-month-old fetus would have a head far too large to fit through the human pelvis. The mother would die. The baby would die. The species would end. So evolution found a workaround. It didn't widen the pelvis. It didn't shrink the brain. It pushed the baby out early. Human gestation lasts roughly 40 weeks. But compared to other primates of similar body size and brain complexity, that's at least 12 months short. The baby arrives with a brain that's only about 30% of its adult size. A chimpanzee newborn arrives at roughly 40%. A macaque at close to 70%. Your brain, the organ that defines the species, ships before it's anywhere close to finished. And the consequences are everywhere. A newborn horse can stand within an hour. A newborn chimp can grip its mother's fur and hold on while she moves through trees. A newborn human can do almost nothing. It can't hold up its own head. It can't roll over. It can't regulate its body temperature. It can't focus its eyes on anything beyond 20 to 30 centimeters. If left alone, it would die in hours, not days. Hours. This isn't normal among mammals. This isn't even normal among primates. Human newborns are, by any comparative measure, the most helpless infants in the primate order. Biologists have a term for this: altriciality. An altricial species is one whose offspring are born underdeveloped and need extended parental care. Most primates are precocial. Their offspring are born relatively mature. Humans are secondarily altricial. We evolved from precocial ancestors but reversed course, producing increasingly helpless offspring as the brain got bigger and the pelvis got tighter. But the pelvic compromise didn't just make babies helpless, it made birth dangerous. In species with a tight fit between fetal head and birth canal, delivery complications rise dramatically: obstructed labor, birth asphyxia, maternal hemorrhage. For most of human history, childbirth was one of the leading causes of death for women of reproductive age. Estimates suggest that in pre-modern populations, roughly 1 in 100 births resulted in maternal death. Over a woman's reproductive lifetime, cumulative risk could reach 1 in 10, or higher. Evolution solved the brain size problem by making birth a life-threatening event. That's the trade-off. That's the cost of the upgrade. Modern medicine has cut that risk dramatically. Cesarean sections, antibiotics, blood transfusions, fetal monitoring, these interventions have made childbirth safer than at any point in human history. But the underlying engineering problem hasn't changed. The canal is still tight. The head is still too big. The baby still arrives months before it's ready. We've patched the symptoms. The architecture remains the same. But here's where it gets more complicated, because in the last 2 decades, researchers have pushed back on Washburn's original framing. In 2012, Holly Dunsworth, an anthropologist at the University of Rhode Island, published a study that reframed the obstetric dilemma entirely. She argued that the pelvis isn't actually as narrow as it could be. Women's pelvises are, on average, wider than men's, and there's significant variation. The constraint, she proposed, isn't geometry, it's energy. Dunsworth called her model the EGG hypothesis: energetics, growth, and gestation. Her argument went like this: human pregnancy ends not when the baby's head gets too big for the pelvis, but when the mother's metabolism hits a ceiling. Growing a fetus is extraordinarily expensive. By the end of the 3rd trimester, the metabolic cost of maintaining the pregnancy approaches roughly 2 to 2.5 times the mother's basal metabolic rate. That's close to the maximum sustained metabolic output any human can maintain. The body simply can't fuel the pregnancy any longer. In this model, birth isn't a geometric failure, it's an energy crisis. And here's the thing: these 2 explanations aren't mutually exclusive. The pelvis is tight. The metabolic cost is enormous. Both constraints push toward the same outcome. Get the baby out now, finish building it outside. Put your hand on your forehead, right now. Everything behind your palm, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that plans, decides, and makes you who you are, wasn't there when you were born. It grew later, outside the womb, shaped by everything you saw, heard, and touched in a world you weren't supposed to be in yet. But that solution created a problem evolution had never had to solve before. If the baby ship's unfinished, someone has to finish building it after delivery, and that someone is the parent. And this is where the engineering trade-off becomes a social one. Human infants require more postnatal care than any other primate, not by a small margin, by an enormous one. A chimpanzee infant becomes functionally independent within 4 to 5 years. A human child is nutritionally dependent for at least 6 to 7 years, and not fully neurologically mature until the mid-20s. The prefrontal cortex doesn't finish developing until around age 25. You spend roughly the first third of your life completing a brain that was supposed to be finished before you were born. And this extended dependency changed everything about human social structure. Anthropologists call it cooperative breeding. Unlike most great apes, where the mother raises offspring largely alone, human child rearing became a group project. Grandmothers, siblings, aunts, unrelated adults, entire communities organized around the shared work of keeping these helpless, unfinished babies alive long enough for their brains to come online. The nuclear family didn't build human civilization. The premature baby did, because a baby that helpless requires a village. And a village requires cooperation, communication, shared norms, and trust. The same pressures that made human infants so vulnerable are the pressures that made human societies so complex. So here's what actually happened. Roughly 3 million years ago, your ancestors began walking upright and thinking bigger thoughts. The pelvis narrowed, the brain expanded, and when the two collided, evolution didn't solve the problem. It improvised. It pushed the baby out before it was done and told the species to figure out the rest. And the species did. It built families, tribes, languages, cultures, entire civilizations around the simple biological fact that its offspring arrive broken, unfinished, and unable to survive alone. Every hospital, every school, every lullaby, every parenting book, every sleepless night spent holding a newborn who can't even lift its own head, all of it traces back to one engineering decision made in the skeleton of an ape that stood up for the first time on an African savanna. You were born too early. Every human who has ever lived was born too early, and everything we've built since has been an attempt to make up for it.